crispy barbecue zinger from KFC. Delicious Kentucky Fried Chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, crispy onion, smoky barbecue sauce in a brioche bun. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger-licking good.
Yeah, man, this is Graham Smog, and whenever I'm rolling through Jamaica, got to keep my radio locked to the bridge. 99 FM, keep it locked. I also reggae and dancehall music live, see?
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, for justice. The people's champion. Justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a job. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be.
Happy Tuesday to all our listeners. Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with Jamaicans for Justice. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
Now, before we start, I just want to always say thank you to those who keep tuning in. Obviously, there are other things that you could be doing on your Tuesday afternoon, so we are quite grateful for you checking up with us and ensuring that you are also learning. And to those who are actively participating on our Instagram and Twitter accounts, thanks again. Remember, you can WhatsApp your views to us at 239-7583, and you can call in at the studio line at 676-4996. Anything else, Jane?
No, that's a good intro for the show this week.
All right. So there are several things that we saw happening in the news cycle last week, one of which we're going to be discussing a little bit more towards the end of the program. Now, you would have heard the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Minister Marlene Malahou Fort, who made a very personal comment during her sectoral presentation last Tuesday in the House of Parliament, where she indicated that abortion will not be done on her watch. That's not the language that she used, and I hate repeating that headline. The language that she used, it evades me at the moment, but she did indicate that it's something that, due to her personal conviction and the experiences of her mother, it's not something that she necessarily would be championing at this time. Now, again, the conversation will be had towards the end of the program, but I'm flagging it at the onset, so you know that that conversation will take place, and whether or not it was an appropriate comment to be made during the middle of the sectoral presentation, given abortion is one of those constitutional issues that the country has not managed to deal with when it comes to access to safe abortion, especially in instances of medical emergencies and those who have suffered the trauma of rape. All right. So that's one issue that we're touching on during our human rights recap of the week. The other major issue that happened last week, which is quite heart-rendering, heartbreaking, is the death of young Daniel Rowe, 8 years old, who attended the Brayton Primary School in Portmore, St. Catherine. For those of us who was watching the news cycle last week, you would have recalled that on Thursday, it was reported that young Daniel went missing. And then on Saturday morning, I believe, we all heard the news where an update was provided that she was found dead. It is something, Jade and listeners, that obviously we condemn it strongly. And it brought to the fore several concerns that have been plaguing our education system, the safety and security, the inequity in the system, where you see certain protocols in private schools, the proprietary schools in Jamaica, versus that happens in the public institutions. And people, rightfully so, have been making the calls for those security protocols to be updated We heard from the Minister of Education yesterday when she attended a devotion that was held at the school, Minister Favour Williams, indicating that CCTV cameras will be installed across primary schools. An audit will be undertaken to get a sense of what happened. And these are worthy recommendations to make. And we hope that the ministry will stick to those recommendations, because far too often we hear of promises and they're not fulfilled. Since that has taken shape, just this morning, I believe, we heard from DCP Fitz Bailey, where he indicated that facial identification has been provided through some software that they have with the JCF, based on that CCTV footage of the woman who was last seen with young Daniel. And we're encouraging persons, let me pull up the number for the Halfway Tree Police Station. We're encouraging persons to call the Halfway Tree Police Station at 926-8184 if you have any information on the person of interest in this matter. Because all of us, I think we're rightfully outraged and we want young Daniel to get justice. And to the family of young Daniel, her mother, her father, our condolences from JFJ. For those who are praying people, I'm sure their prayers are with you. And for others, their well wishes. So keep strong amid the circumstances and know that Jamaica is standing with the family. All right? Over to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for that necessary but somber introduction to today's show. So we'll move right along into our right of the day for today, which is related to our rights under due process. And that right of the day is: any person convicted of a criminal offense shall have the right to have his conviction and sentence reviewed by a court of jurisdiction which is superior to the court in which he was convicted and sentenced. So this essentially is what gives you your right to appeal a sentence that you were handed down. So if you got a sentence in the parish court, you can appeal to the next highest court, which is the Supreme Court, and in the Supreme Court, the next highest court, which is the Court of Appeal, and controversially from the Court of Appeal to the Privy Council. So that is your right to appeal. We also have a trivia question for today, which is: what is the penalty for grievous sexual assault when you are convicted in the parish court? So there are some offences where you get lesser sentences in the parish court than if you had been convicted in the Supreme Court. Grievous sexual assault is one. So what is that sentence in the parish court? And you can participate by sending a WhatsApp to 2397583, or you can send a message on our Instagram pages.
Now, the topic of today, it's quite timely, to say the least. And a very similar topic was discussed where JFJ and the Representative Jeremy Taylor from the DPP's office, as well as Clyde Williams, discussed with Dean Jackson Miller whether or not the judges are handing down lenient sentencing. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be having a similar conversation today. And our topic is titled Sense and Sentencing, so the public can understand as we unpack the sentencing guidelines that guide the courts, as well as you understanding the impact of guilty pleas, mitigating factors, and so on. And before I start out with what Jade has officially put together for us to read from, when we look at the circumstances of young Daniel, for example, we've heard the renewed calls for death penalties, whether the perpetrator, when caught, the judges will see it fit to hand down a strong sentence. In Jamaica, when it comes to the high rising crime rate, the judges are criticized again for handing down what many people deem to be disproportionately low sentences. And I think last week or the week before, we saw the case of Davian Bryan, who was a convicted repeated sex offender, who was given 23-year sentence by the court. And I think that matter was actually heard in the parish court,
Yes.
if memory serves me correct. And that's a conversation we need to have at some point as well. Justice Minister Delroy Chuck, he came out public to indicate that though he's not criticizing the courts, which in a sense was what he was doing, he believed that a sentence of life imprisonment was more appropriate to be handed down in that particular matter when you look at Brian being a repeated sex offender and the gruesome acts that he meted out to our youngsters were actually underage girls. So sentencing again is back for discussion.
Yes, so today we're just going to break down some of the considerations that a judge has to have, particularly when, as in Brian's case, the offender has pleaded guilty. So what are the considerations, what we call aggravating and mitigating factors that might affect a sentence? And what are those pieces of legislation and policy that we need to be looking at, so such as the Criminal Justice Administration Act and the sentencing guidelines which guide judges? So is it that these pieces of legislation and policy need reform, or is it that the sentences are appropriate due to the specific circumstances? So we're going to break that down today, and we will be joined by Attorney at Law Clyde Williams. I believe we have been joined by Attorney at Law Clyde Williams. So good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Blessed love.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let us just start out with your immediate reaction to the public, saying that the judges are not considering what the public wants, the public interest in handing down these sentencing, and that they're devoid of reality. What is your immediate reaction to that?
I wouldn't use words like devoid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll also back up by saying that judgments on a sentence is a judgment. So it's not a question of right or wrong sometimes. It is a question of what is your judgment as to what is appropriate in the circumstances. Having heard all the mitigating factors, all the aggravating factors, and having heard the evidence of the act itself. So my position generally is to listen to the voice of the people. I'm not saying the voice of the people is the only measure. It's very important for me to underline that point. It is not the only measure, because proportionality and parity are also important measures. In other words, is the sentence proportionate to the crime and the circumstances of the crime, including the age of the victim and the age of the offender? And is there parity in that from time to time are similar offenses in similar circumstances getting the same sentence? So I like to listen to the voice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mr. Williams, you mentioned that, the judge would have considered all the mitigating and aggravating factors. So for our listeners, what are some of those factors that the judge would be considering when coming to these sentences?
All right. So let's say in a rape case,
Mm-hmm.
a sexual offense case, not only rape, but what statute? Our culture is a little homophobic, so the parliamentarians didn't want to call anal sex sex. So we now have what is called grievous sexual assault, which would mean non-consensual penetration of somebody's mouth or somebody's anus. So those are on the same terms level like rape. So the age of the victim is a significant aggravating factor.
Mm-hmm.
So children, because if you back up a little bit, remember these offenses are about power being exercised over someone. Power. So if the victim is a child and the younger the child, aggravating.
Mm-hmm.
If the offender is a child and the younger the child, mitigating, meaning lessening the sentence on that factor. Then you have circumstances like did the person enter a plea of guilt? It's considered that a plea of guilt shows remorse. So you're giving a benefit for that. That's a mitigating circumstance as well. The nature of the offense, how it was carried out. Now remember, rape is rape, but you have aggravated circumstances. Say, for instance, the person hits the victim multiple times, has a knife, has a gun, is a gangbang, all of those things. Or successive rapes and trauma. Those are aggravating factors. So a court will look at it and make a determination. However, the determination is usually made within a range. So since 2017, we have sentencing guidelines. We've come a far way. We never used to have that. So there was lack of parity. So a youth in St. James commit the same offense like a youth in St. Mary, but guess what? The youth in St. James get 15 more years than the youth in St. Mary. Similar circumstances. So we decided to publish guidelines. So, for instance, in rape, the normal range is 15. I'm talking in the guidelines, 2017. The normal range, 15 to 25. That's the normal range. So a court would look in that. And for every offense, you will have that kind of normal range as well.
Okay, so I just wanted to firstly just clarify the grievous sexual assault is yes, anal assault, but anal assault without the penis, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
You use everything other than the penis to penetrate.
Which is an important distinction to make, because one of the things that we look at, for example, Mr. Williams, and I want to clarify for the listeners, and it goes back to a point that JFJ has always taken, that one has to be careful what the blame we put at the feet of the courts, as some of the public would do. Because when you look at the definition of rape versus grievous sexual assault and where those matters are heard, it's important to make that distinction. So, Jade, I'm not sure if you can walk us through grievous sexual assault quickly and the terms of imprisonment based on where the matter is heard at parish versus the higher court.
Right. So as we would have described, grievous sexual assault is the penetration of the mouth or anus by anything other than the penis without consent. If it is heard in the parish court, it is a maximum sentence of 3 years. Mm-hmm. And if it is heard in the Supreme Court, it is the similar consideration as rape, where it is 15 years minimum up to life imprisonment as the sentence.
But actual bogrino, which is anal penetration.
Yes, anal penetration, which we always make the distinction to say that it
with
does
consent?
not... Well, it doesn't consider consent technically.
No, I'm saying to you, but it doesn't say
yes,
unconsensual.
Right.
The statute just says once it's anal penetration.
Right.
Which is the point that we're making, Mr. Williams, that due to these things not being properly defined in law, the court will have to be looking at what provisions there are.
Yes.
So that 10 years maximum for burglary, for example,
yes,
versus life imprisonment for rape maximum, it's something that the public, I think, ought to recognize those types of distinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there are distinctions respectfully, without merit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There are distinctions without merit. So say, for instance, a wicked evil man from the pit of hell bugger a little boy, 5, 6. Let's use the ages of the 6, 9, 11, and 16. Let's use that, right? Now, how do you measure that different from rape? So for many countries, they don't draw distinctions between anus, mouth, and vagina. Once it's penetration, whatever you use, penis or otherwise, and it's not consensual, they define it as rape. And it then makes everything a little bit more objective in terms of, in other words, there's no gender difference here. Because remember, men would be buggered and women could be buggered and as well raped. So when you you would take away all of that and focus on the unconsensual nature, the penetration without consent, and if there are aggravating circumstances of remember, the second, when you think about life, all of this is about the preservation of your person. That's what these offenses target. So you have life, liberty, and the preservation of your person. And that's what many countries have done, including Barbados. They don't draw those distinctions. But our parliament have a little homophobic, kind of ridiculous, in my opinion, view about the fact that we're living in a more diverse society now. So they don't want to call rape is considered sexual intercourse without permission. They don't want to call the other thing intercourse.
Mr. Williams, pause on that thought for me. We're actually behind the okay, we can continue. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I mean, I appreciate you clarifying clarifying that for our listeners. And I wanted to ask,
and perhaps we should say this, Jade, before you move on to your next question, forgive me, that the recommendations have been made to Parliament when they were reviewing the sexual offences and other related pieces of legislation. And in their 2018 recommendation report, they indicated that they will not be making a change to the definition of rape because in their estimation, they want to have buggery sent to a referendum.
Yes.
That's what they indicated. So our men and boys continue not to be protected at the same level as our girls are.
Yes. Imagine 10 years. Imagine a boy being destroyed and the perpetrator, the maxi, is getting his 10 years. Just imagine that for a moment.
Or the judges have to be looking at what the other offences under the Sexual Offences Act to piece together so some justice can be served, which is not good at all.
I want to also just underscore this before Jade comes with the next question. Buggery, as on the books of Jamaica, is not a homosexual. It's not a
Yes, we get what you're saying. It's applicable to all couples that are able to participate in the activity.
That's correct. So Jamaicans need to just stop and understand the thing. Buggery doesn't deal with anything about same sex. It is not a question of same sex because women can be buggered in this sense, if you were to look at it like that. Buggery is anal penetration and very, very absurd in our legislation, bestiality. So our law has twinned buggery with bestiality. Now you ask, what is damaging an animal doing enough in an act called the offences against the person? The act is called the offences against the person. I'm not saying you must not deal with that kind of an animal, assault. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But so part of the recommendation for the change is to get rid of bestiality out of an offences against the person act. But in our law, if a woman and a man decides to engage in anal sex, or two men decide to in private, not in public, outrage indecency, the same way me wouldn't want to walk down the road and see heterosexuals populating on the road. So I don't expect homosexuals to be doing that, and they don't. So my question is, at the end, who is the state protecting? Why is the criminal law encroaching on somebody's personal space as to what they would like to do with their partner?
Yes. And very simply put, Mr. Williams, how these regressive laws are playing a role in hampering what type of provisions exist for the courts to act. I don't want the listeners to miss the point. That's what we're making.
Also, just to say, men find women together as, let me not use men in general, but some men find women together exciting, So if you look at the statute that was made by men, all of these laws are made by men in England, and don't forget, don't lose sight of that. This is an English law that we take from colonial days. It's not Jamaican people make this law. It's English white men make these laws. And at the time, they were heavily influenced by religion. So in that same law, they don't criminalize consenting sexual affection between women. They don't. But in addition to buggery, our law says if a man and a man have any kind of intimacy, that in and of itself is an offense. That is the anti-homosexual offense in our laws. It says if you were, I've forgotten the word unnatural, I've forgotten the word they use now, where JD, can you pick it up? It's just below.
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're referring to. So it's actually the original section is the unnatural crime, and the secondary one that you're referring to now is outrages and decency. But I don't want us to get lost in this conversation. Yes, it is very interesting though. Hopefully we will do an episode maybe on that. But I wanted to ask, considering that we're having this conversation now where there's this disparity between, for example, the sentence of buggery, which could include someone's assault, and the sentence of rape, what kind of challenges, limitations are the judges facing? Because, say, for example, the news reports a case of serious assault where the assault is a buggery, and then the case is followed, and the judge hands down what is the sentence they can hand down, which is the 10 years. So what are the other limitations or challenges that judges might be facing to give a proportionate sentence?
Well, you have hit the nail square on the head. So unless we reform that piece of legislation and bring buggery on parity, let me not use that word, but that's what they use in the law, the parity. Bring buggery and parity in terms of sentencing, as in life minimum.
So is it that there are other offenses that...
or let me redefine that statement a little bit.
Yes.
Based on our recommendation. For rape itself to be, sexual intercourse to be redefined in the Sexual Offences Act.
Absolutely.
That will consider that non-consensual forced penetration.
Yes, no,
aspect,
absolutely. Yeah. So, I wondered if there are other offenses like this, where, like grievous sexual assault, for example, because there was a recommendation to increase the parish court sentence, or even the split of the jurisdiction between parish court and Supreme Court. Yeah,
the recommendation was for that the acts within grievous sexual assault to be itemized, for lack of a better word, and indicate which court has jurisdiction over what.
Right.
Which would also increase...
Which was not necessarily what was accepted.
Well, they didn't.
Yes, what was accepted was to increase the parish court term from 3 to 5 years.
And they said to leave it within the jurisdiction of the DPP's office to make that determination.
Yes.
Which is something, again, we should be looking at. And I was wondering, Mr. Williams, whether or not the jurisdiction in the Davian Bryant's case, given it was heard in the parish court, I think that perhaps would have factored into anything here that we're discussing in terms of the sentences that he was given?
No, because remember, they had gone into 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
One of the offenses the judge started at 19. Remember that the judge?
Oh yes.
Every rape the judge increased and came around up to 23. Remember, it's 23 but it's just like 1/3 off for good behavior. Let me tell you what you must never lose sight of on a sentence: the 1/3 off for good behavior. So you get 30, but it could be 20, and you're parole. So when you hear the numbers, you must instinctively think 1/3 off for good behavior, because you are eligible for parole from you serve 2/3 of sentence. And that's what the public is really taking issue with.
Yes, but when I hear, and I'll ask Faye to respond when we come back from the break, because we're right up on it now. But when I hear us talk about consideration for parole, it's consideration, right? Does that mean you are released? Which I know the answer to this question, but just for our listeners.
And the other side of it, because I hear the public, some Twitter comments, or see Twitter comments rather, whether or not guilty pleas should be considered, the discount should be considered when it involves gruesome acts of vulnerable groups such as our children. So that's something else that the public is saying, no, the law should be reformed to not have that consideration made. So it's something for us to also touch on after the break.
Because even this consideration about the gruesome thing, we saw it in the recommendations from the Joint Select Committee. So we'll talk about it after the break.
No borders, no boundaries, just the sound of good music.
The new crispy barbecue zinger from KFC. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good. The time by KFC is
1:30.
Over 14,000 Jamaicans are living with HIV and not yet on treatment. We want you to know you can live a normal life with HIV. Now is the time to get on treatment. Now is the time to start taking your medication on time, every time. Now is the time for your HIV status to become undetectable. Come to Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. We will help you to reach viral suppression. Now is the time to achieve all your goals and live a long and healthy life. To get on treatment, contact Jamaica AIDS Support for Life at 876-925-0021. A message from Jamaica AIDS Support for Life and the kind support of USAID from the American people.
Montego Bay, Jamaica. Caribbean Airlines and Downtown Entertainment present Reggae Sumfest 2023 at the Catherine Hall Entertainment Center with a massive injection of 90s dancehall. On Friday, July 21, don't miss the Boombox segment featuring Harry Toddler, General B, Nitty Kutchi, Tony Curtis, Jigsy Kid, Silver Cat, and Mega Banters. Get more dancehall energy on Saturday, July 22 in the historic tribute to King Jammy featuring Admiral Bailey, Shaka Demus, Leroy Gibbons, Lieutenant Stitchy, Pictures, Bunny General, Chuck Turner, and Azza Lineage. Don't miss the 30th anniversary of Reggae Sumfest. Get your general and VIP tickets at reggaesumfest.com. Reggae Sumfest 2023, sponsored by Sunshine Snacks, Pepsi, TEF, Half Moon, Regency Blinds, Prime Trust, Sandals, Round Hill, Sea Garden, Deja, Brown Box, and Centurion.
Importers. Shipments requiring you to pay customs duties and taxes are cleared on a customs goods declaration known as an IM4 or IMS4. Ask your clearing agent to provide your customs declaration, customs assessment notice, and customs receipt once duties and taxes are paid. Where your clearing agent may not be able to provide the IM4 or IMS4, request your customs goods declaration registration number or C number, which can be used to verify your payments. Importers, request your IM4, IMS4, or C number. It is your right. For details, email the Jamaica Customs Agency at public.relations@jca.gov.jm. Jamaica Customs, keeping our customers in focus.
Last year, Reggae Sumfest was on fire as a host of top-flight Jamaican artists turned out for an unforgettable musical tribute to iconic dancehall producer and prolific hitmaker Dave Kelly. This year, it will be magnificent as leading Jamaican entertainers across generations will come together to honor one of the most influential figures in modern popular music, producer and sound system operator extraordinaire, Lloyd James, the man we have come to know as King Jammy. Yes, it's tribute to the King. Reggae Sumfest 2023, Catherine Hall, Montego Bay, Jamaica, July 16 to 22. You can't miss this. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value Flow, Iberostar, JTV, Secrets, Red Stripe, Grace, Magnum, TVJ, and H&L Agro.
King James, play sweeter, stronger, better. KFC, take it up a notch with the new zinger. It's got the taste and the flavor, irresistible. Zinger so deliciously, it's on a new level. Crispy barbecue zinger, love the onion, crisp with the cheddar.
the new crispy barbecue zinger. Delicious Kentucky fried chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, crispy onions with smoky barbecue sauce in a brioche bun. Available for a limited time. The new crispy barbecue zinger. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Don't wanna leave, don't wanna go. We'll stay tuned to Bridge 99 Jamaica. Don't wanna leave, we'll stay tuned. Bridge 99 Jamaica. The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, by justice. The people's champion.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. Today's topic is sense and sentencing. If you are just joining us, we are with attorney at law Clyde Williams, and we're trying to make sense of our sentencing structure here in Jamaica. So before the break, Mr. Williams, we spoke about parole. What does it mean when you are told, okay, this person has 15 years before they're eligible for parole. What does this mean? Once they're considered for parole, they're released, or what's the process?
It's a consideration, but it's an important line in the sand because you're not eligible for early release until you cross that line.
Okay.
So you may be denied it because your behavior not up to scratch. You don't think you have been rehabilitated and so on. But it's an important line, and it is a line that is in the hands largely of the offender. If you think about it, whether or not it will be at the first go or second or third or fourth. So it's a very important line. So my own view in accord with the public is I think that the normal range from my position should be increased. That's my position. But I also want to say, and I'm coming back to the part about discount because it's important. I also want to say it's very important in my view because most of the objectives of sentencing relate to persons other than the offender, most of them. There are 4 primary ones: retribution, deterrence, prevention, and rehabilitation. Of the 4, only rehabilitation, as you can see, focuses on the offender. We don't do enough of that in Jamaica. Our systems are not built for that, and we need to address it. But I don't want us to be afraid of recognizing that retribution, as in you must pay for your crime, and if it's horrendous, then you get more time. Deterrence, which means other persons looking on must have a sense that if they were to venture down this road, what they're likely to face, and it could cost somebody not. And important, prevention. That person who is incarcerated can't do it anymore. I want to raise this with you before I get to discount because I'm looking for some feedback to shape my own opinion. How do you determine if a sexual offender is rehabilitating when he's in prison or she's in prison? What is the objective means of determining that the person is rehabilitating?
Well, that's certainly something we'd have to consider much more deeply than the time would allow.
That's all right. I'm going to move on quickly. I raise it to make the point. That I have a challenge when at the beginning a court is in those circumstances not going to consider rehabilitation big in terms of when the sentencing for a sexual predator. Because how do you measure objectively? So what's going to happen? I'm not going to turn on retribution, deterrence, and prevention. I want to move quickly now to the question of discount. Listeners, I know how you feel, but it is very important. Why? You don't want to send the children through another traumatic episode of having to turn up and give evidence. And if the offender is prepared, having carried out atrocious acts, wicked, dastardly acts, is prepared to say, listen, I'm going to fess up and face my time. Because once you fess up, you're going to get some time. So the question is, do we not give them a discount, or do we say, well, put the children through the trauma of having to prove the case? And you can never tell. The case could be not properly prepared, and the offender gets off on a not guilty verdict from the jury on a point of great lawyering. So what you don't want is to have the things turning on that. What I disagree with is the 50% discount. I'm not lie to you. That's too much.
Okay.
Why? Listen, man, Jade, you know, a corner, you back against the wall, evidence, strong like oak tree, turn up like big heart. Where you gonna go? Like a big mule, where you gonna go? So part of it is also strategic for the offender that are going to get less time. But I don't believe in 50%, 1/3 the most.
But some jurisdiction, Clyde, and when we were together on the program, this was a point I was making.
All angles.
Yes, that one of the things that we can look at is 2 things. I don't believe in a one size fits all. Let's increase the starting points. I don't believe in that, because I think there has to be some flexibility for the judge again to look at the circumstances of each case. But what I do agree with you on is different starting points for different types of offenses. So for me, yes. So when I look at things like a child who is involved, I don't, and by the way, my board has not necessarily approved this from JFJ. So let me say, Mikkel doesn't agree that starting point should be 15 years. I think if a child is involved, the offender is over 21 years, for example, it should maybe be 20 years minimum as that starting point.
I just wanted to interrupt. Well, I don't know about the starting point, but I know that in the Joint Select Committee report, the Joint Select Committee itself had recommended a new offence to be added to the Sexual Offences Act that would support the offence of rape and grievous sexual assault, to say that where a child or a person living with intellectual disability was involved as a victim, then there should be a life sentence for the offence. Like, they didn't specify as the starting points like in the sentencing.
So they're saying
but
the imposition of life would be...
It would have been an aggravating factor that...
It has to be, you know, for me. And then even with the discounts, Clyde, I as I said, I have to be careful. But I don't see, for example, 50%, and it's a balancing act, I know, because you don't want to put the victims through trauma. But it's something I think worth discussing a little bit more.
May I just weigh in quickly? I think your idea is a great one, because what it does, it doesn't take away the discretion of the judge. Remember, we're talking starting points. So we don't take away the judge's discretion in moving up or down in relation to aggravating or mitigating. So we're not doing that. So we couldn't discuss it greater on all angles for the time, you know how it is.
Yes.
But that's a very significant point. The judge still will have to look at aggravating. But what we're saying, if it's rape of a child, let's start at 20 years. And it's committed by a big old strong back smarty. 20 years.
Man or woman, because some...
Man or woman.
Yes.
That's why, man or woman. If it's two adults, it's still bad. But the starting point is 15. You can move beyond the 25 range, because remember, if it's a normal range and the acts are abnormal, as in the offense itself engages a lot of abnormality acts in terms of brutality, it couldn't be then normal. It couldn't fall in the normal range. And the judgments say this, that a judge then could go outside of the normal range, given the multiple aggravating circumstances and minimum mitigating factors.
And in that case, Clyde, it wouldn't be subjected to challenges, because I was saying to Jay during the break, there was
challenging law. You
will, but the basis of it though, because there's a case in the Gleaner, I'm not sure if you saw it. Person subjected to 36 years for lighting a mattress with children on fire, and then challenging it in the court that it was excessive.
Is that right? You see, here
it is a right, absolutely.
Yes. Part of what is built into your right of a fair trial, civil or criminal, is the appellate levels.
Yes.
So what we feel in our jurisprudence is that you must subject it to 3 judges to look again, and finally to 5. And if it well big, to 7 or 9, full court to call it. So it's very important to allow persons to explore all their options until we say you can't go no further.
Absolutely.
Both sides, both the defense and because remember, sentencing also shows society's abhorrence or how disgusted we are of a particular act. So Jay, let me tell you, Michael, I want you to push that a little more, the starting points, because a lot of countries do that. If it's a child, starting point. If it's an adult, starting point.
Yes.
Crimes against women, starting points. Different from crime. It's just a very, especially sexual crimes, they have different starting points, because victims and offenders come to the situation with different circumstances and so on.
Well, Mr. Williams, I want to give you your last word.
But before you get to the last word, one comment from you, Mr. Williams. Sentencing guidelines. Any views on whether or not it needs... I have many thoughts on it. We're doing our proposal before the Joint Select Committee on the mandatory minimum. So that's something we're touching on from JFJ. But any thoughts on the sentencing guidelines? Should be reviewed. Is it sufficient enough? Any thoughts?
No, I would review it every 10 years. We've gone 7 years with it. I would want to have some structure rather than a kind of responding to what's on the ground in a given situation. So I would say 10 years, and then every 10 years we do a review. So we have 3 to go. But if you think the review should be brought forward, fine. So I do agree that we should build into the guidelines a review process. The second thing I want to say quickly, and this is I could be wrong on this. So I want to just say this is an opinion that I could be well wrong on. You ever go up on a work site, Jade, Mikkel, when they build when they do construction? You ever go up on one of them sites there? Hear me I say. You see, in Jamaica, you can't say to certain, not just poor people, right across the board in Jamaica because of our personality type. You can't say, could you just behave yourselves, please, gentlemen? Why don't you just honor the situation and just stop the noise or stop this? That's not how we respond at all. Now, you may say a lot of it is a slavery hangover, but that's just the reality. Look at our politicians, how they get on in the house. And you say, why they can't get on a little better? But we have a soft speaker. Any other speaker, they start drop down some sentence on them.
You're absolutely correct. Mr. Lewis, I see my son talking to somebody, say, yo, elder. And I was so shocked because I've never heard this little boy talk like that before.
But there you go. So Jamaicans learn to switch, register. This is when I work side, Jade. You see when the man in my build your house, if he want the house get built, they say the man who have 4 man, he have to go so. Yo, move up.
Yes,
come down.
You're correct.
So, gentlemen, let's start the work now. Please, you have to go, yo. So what I'm saying to you is this. I am a believer that for some offenses, and I want to put rape on the top of it because you don't get over it. When somebody dies, there is grieving, but the person has transitioned to their God. There is grieving. They don't live with that. Who lives with it would be his family and so on. So it hurts. Mm-hmm. But sexual offenses in particular, when somebody has been abused in those cases, I am a believer in strong sentencing, strong messages to Jamaica. Women and children are being abused routinely. The numbers are off the chart. And the question is, 2 things I want to see. Within 6 months, we should have a trial of those offenses. Within 6 months. And because I believe it must be fair to both witnesses and victims and so on. Mm-hmm. Within 6 months, except where there is medical report to say the complainant not yet ready, right? Because we have to deal with that situation. Within 6 months and get the heaviest sentences that the society as a general feels is appropriate in the circumstances. 20 years, starting point for children. I live with the 15 for adults, up to about 40 for me. That's my range.
Mm. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, as usual.
Listen, love, you can call me Clyde when we come back and come remember say me in a JFJ family, you know.
We know that. We know that. But because Jay there beside me, I say Mr. Williams, I say me follow suit.
No. I want to know too. Listen to me. I love the tune, The People's Champion. Can I tell you?
Thank you.
It's 1999. Give thanks to Carolyn and that crew. You know,
absolutely.
I got involved shortly after. We did a tremendous amount of work, and you've built on a great platform. Can I tell you? I've never doubted the mission of Jamaicans for justice and its purpose in Jamaica. Never for one moment.
Beautiful.
Blessed love.
Absolute legacy of justice here at JFJ. We take the break or can... Okay.
Hi, I'm Ronald Thwaites, and I'm the host of The Public Eye and The Open Mind on The Bridge 99 and Irie Jam in the tri-state area. This program will tell you the truth about life back a yard. Fair, open talk. No gossip, no slander. We want to listen to your concerns. Also want to help you with your problems in JA. We at The Bridge rate you and affirm our oneness as citizens of this blessed land we love. So join us now on Wednesdays on The Bridge, crossing the waters, linking Jamaicans and Jamaican lovers everywhere.
Reggae Sumfest celebrates its 30th stage in this July. Reggae Sumfest, the greatest festival on earth, will be bringing the energy and vibes. Kicking things off Sunday with a family fun day, followed on Monday by a street dance. Tuesday, the all-white party blitz, and Wednesday, the all-black fashion statement. Closing out Thursday with the global sound clash, and then all roads lead to festival nights 1 and 2, with performances from Chronic Law, Kabaka Pyramid, Valiant, Morgan Heritage, Tommy Lee, Richie Spice, Ja Vinci, Tanya Stevens, Massacre, and many more. Reggae Sumfest, the greatest festival on earth. Get your tickets now at reggaesumfest.com. Our music, our festival.
Importers. Shipments requiring you to pay customs duties and taxes are cleared on a customs goods declaration known as an IM4 or IMS4. Ask your clearing agent to provide your customs declaration, customs assessment notice, and customs receipt once duties and taxes are paid. Where your clearing agent may not be able to provide the IM4 or IMS4, request your customs goods declaration registration number or C number, which can be used to verify your payments. Importers, request your IM4, IMS4, or C number. It is your right. For details, email the Jamaica Customs Agency at public.relations@jca.gov.jm. Jamaica Customs, keeping our customers in focus.
You're now in tune to
The Bridge 99 FM.
from Jamaica
To the world. Right.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans are justice. The people's champion. Justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We were joined earlier by Mr. Clyde Williams, attorney at law, and we were looking at the sentencing guidelines, the overall structure within the country. And I hope you realize it's a very complex issue. It's not just something we can just say off with the heads, as some of you have been calling for. We don't support death penalty here at JFJ. But you realize that it's worth consideration because it balances the rights of the victims as well as those who are the offenders, because we have to be looking at the age of the offender, circumstances of each case, what it means for public safety. All of those things must be considered. But one of the things I also hoped you took away from the discussion was that a lot of times public officials will come out and say the judges, and we heard it. Prime Minister Mayor Motley made what I deemed to be an unfortunate comment at the CARICOM meeting, and we have heard it repeated here in Jamaica, where the judges are often blamed. The judges have to act within the guidelines, the law, what is permissible. They can't act outside of it, right? And I think the public has to be mindful of that. Obviously, there are room for improvement, areas for reform, and we must consider that as well. The broader justice reform is needed in the country. So these are certain considerations for us to make. JFJ, we're going to be making our proposal before the Joint Select Committee. I think the deadline is June 19th, so we're putting together some of these proposals to ensure that it balances, again, public safety, the victims' rights, as well as those who are being brought before the courts on the allegations. Yes?
Absolutely, yes.
Now, I want us to touch on something in the few minutes we have left. On May 17th, several NGOs, I think 11 NGOs came together, and 2 advocates. These NGOs include AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, Equality for All Foundation, E for Life, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, Jamaica Network of Seropositives, JFJ, National Integrity Action, Stand Up for Jamaica, Carol Narcisse, and Cadre Folks. We came together and we wrote an open letter to the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. We have not gotten an official response on a letterhead, but we did get a response from the Permanent Secretary addressing some of the things that we had raised. Now, as we indicated, the country is going through a constitutional reform process. And at JFJ and with our partners, we believe that there are some areas for improvement to ensure that there is effective and sufficient public engagement. One of the areas that we had called for in this open letter is for the structure and the working committee of the CRC to be improved upon. So you have 15 members now, but we want to ensure that the type of engagement that you have with the sectors, it is sufficient. So we looked at what happened in the 1990s, and our first critical recommendation is for working groups to be established to ensure that different sectors of society are sufficiently engaged. So in other words, you could have one of the CRC members responsible for a working group that consists of trade unions, civil society organization, another that is considering the working groups of faith-based organizations, and they ensure that the meetings are had with these working groups so that ideas are exchanged and people can bring forward their concerns and recommendations. So we can look at what worked in the 1990s and repeat it, but we don't think what is currently happening with the CRC is sufficient for public engagement. So that's the first thing that we had asked for, broadening the scope of the committee.
Yes, and as a part of that recommendation, we would have asked that the committee is accessible to those persons who are living with disabilities. And that goes into our second point that has to do with public education. And one of the challenges that has arisen out of this process is that there is a recognition that persons don't know what is in the Constitution, but also there's not a sufficient understanding of what is being proposed and what is being proposed to go through as the process of changing the Constitution. So we had recommended at least 1 year to be dedicated to public education around the Constitution as well as the process of constitutional reform, and that education should be in a form that is accessible, keeping in mind that we have a population that consists of persons living with visual and auditory disabilities, intellectual disabilities that may not be able to engage with material as other members of the society would be able to.
So I want to add to that as well, Jade. I saw an article from Reverend Ronnie Thwaites in the Gleaner to say a year minimum as we're asking for, but perhaps 2 years dedicated to this public education. So to add to what you're saying, the town hall meetings must have sufficient advance notice. I can't be scrolling through Twitter and see a town hall meeting happening in 2 days' time.
Yes.
You need a town criers driving through the community telling people. I want to see on Twitter, and I see the ministry starting with some of the IEC materials, but it's not enough. We need much more. Somebody breaking down the Constitution in a way that is understandable and comprehensive. Whatever language name what I just said, but you understand.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things, our third main point was that a joint select committee should also be established. Now, persons may be looking on and say that's so obvious, but when we look at the terms of reference from the CRC, it did not contemplate a joint select committee being established that will have people making their recommendation. So it's two things. That joint select committee that will be established to review a proposed bill saying, let's get rid of the monarchy. This is what we're asking the president's power to be able to do. All of that should be outlined. And key to the joint select committee is that we should have processes before then that clearly outlines how people can make their submissions known to or made to the CRC, what areas they can make a submission on. So yes, there's an email. I don't have it readily available, but people need to know, is it phase one only that I'm making a recommendation on, or is it the entire process? Some little note from the ministry indicates that it's just phase one, but that came, I believe, last week or 2 weeks to my attention, which means, again, advance notice is not being given to the public. Important to that, we have to ensure that these conversations are publicly held. No secret, no supposed to keep on people Constitution. All of your own. Right? And if people, in my humblest of opinion, can't state their opinions and recommendations publicly, I think you're doing a disservice. If you're on that committee, you should be able to articulate to the public what you say, what you recommend. So that should be a public thing done through the PBC, through the GIS, get the engineers running with the public resources that we have. Right?
Yes, and I just want to close out this conversation on the constitutional reform to say there is an intention from the committee to hold a referendum related to what our leadership will look like in terms of
and
our
they
head
must
of
by
state.
Law.
Yes, and they must by law. We urge that the public education process is completed thoroughly prior to any holding of a referendum. We want our public to be able to understand what the issues are so that when this vote goes up, a vote that we are all invested in, we are able to see the reflection of that education in the voting process.
Yes, and importantly, it's not a rushed process. And there has to be a bipartisan agreement that whomever wins the next election that is constitutionally due in 2025, the constitution reform process will continue regardless. So there has to be that coming out. And I saw the minister reaching out to the leader of the opposition to say, let this be. right? So we just want to put on record that we also articulated that in the letter. All right, your trivia quickly?
Yes, so our trivia winner this week was Kamala B. We will reach out to you via Instagram for you to get your winnings. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jade Williams from Jamaicans for Justice.
And I'm Michael Jackson. Thank you so much and see you next week.
The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica the known. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Jamaica, make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention. And police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or Jamaicans4Justice.org.
The people's champion.
Bridge 99 FM, from Jamaica to the Caribbean, to the diaspora, to the world, worldwide. You don't know a future fanboy and dance it, blast it.